When we say precursory factors affecting children's school education failures is kind of a strong language. However, we have many children failed in school education. They have a school education deficits. So they may move to special education service. However, if a special education teachers cannot teach them, and throughout their 12 years of school education, they stay as school education deficiencies and school education disabilities. So it starts from the beginning, is 5 years old, starting schooling at age 5. They require have a solid 5 years of well-balanced cognitive development. So this cognitive development, we say the cognitive development, developmental domains and milestones that what pediatricians check is 5 areas: is cognitive and language, social, emotional, motor functions. So I see this cognitive part is more like a cognitive functions and cognitive, I say it's a cognitive foundation, but cognitive functions, cognitive pathways, right? Cognitive functions, cognitive pathways among these 5, cognitive domains. This cognitive part is directly related to children's learning. When children do not have attention, solid attention, and that attention is a mental energy for the children to be conscious. So when sensory information comes in, that sensory information is a teacher's verbal teaching and visual aid. The teacher used some, visual images or PowerPoint or something, and then visual function, and then speech, teacher's verbal speech. So explanation, verbal explanation. So it's a visual and auditory discrimination. And then the attention should be there so they can receive those visual inputs and auditory inputs, and then their brain process those, right? So it's like when they select, instead of distracted by their peers giggling and speaking, they watch teachers speaking and teachers visual aid. That is just selective attention. And then throughout the teacher, let's say teacher explains about something for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Right now, you are watching my lecture, listening to my lecture, and then hold my lecture. I don't know how many minutes it will be, let's say 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And then your attention is here. It's 100%. And then your brain is busy with processing, not being distracted outside some sounds and noise or just music or anything. You just process it. That's a full power, cognitive power, right? And then you have a full learning, and then you follow my speech and then my content, and then you visually, your mental representation is somehow, by words, and then you just represent it mentally, and then you process. Those are all cognitive part. So children do not have those cognitive functions, especially those attention, and then those, sensory discrimination, most importantly, visual discrimination, auditory discrimination, and then tactile discrimination. Those 3 are most important cognitive functions. And then their cognitive power, and they established, and then they come to school, and then they could be attentive to teachers' teaching. They digest those teaching, they process those teaching, and then they understand when teacher verbally say directions, and then they follow. They physically following is their output process. After process the teacher's direction, and then they show physical action. So follow, the teacher said that everybody stands up, and then they stand up with the teacher, everybody sit down, and then they sit down with the teacher. So kindergarten teachers should practice this one first. Everybody stand up, sit down, and hands out, hands up, and those kind of, so they just give those verbal directions and children follows. And then teacher gives the two directions. Everybody stands up, hands, and then raise your hand. It's a two steps, right? Everybody stands up, raise your hand, and touch your head. So in the beginning, you follow teachers do, and then you follow that. So teacher says, look at me, and then 1, 2, 3. So that's a visual, right? Visual discrimination. So, and then you have a visual memory. So teacher did this first, and then this, and then that. So sequence, the visual sequential memory. So you visually saw, and then it's sequence. So you memorize number 1, number 2, number 3, and then your turn, and then you do follow teachers, actions, sequence the actions. So we call it a visual sequential memory. So those part the teacher just practice it in the kindergarten time, but I don't believe that many kindergarten teachers actually practice this, how to follow auditory direction, verbal directions and all kinds. So anyway, that's a cognitive part. And those for 5 years, children has somehow cognitive weaknesses. Again, as I said, the selective attention, and then 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you sustain your attention. So that sustained attention is focused. Sustained focused attention, you can pay, and then pretty much you are very good learners. You can be very good learners. However, if children cannot do that, those are 5 years older, 6 years older, cannot do that, and then they pretty much have a poor school performance. They could not follow teachers' verbal directions. They cannot follow teachers' teaching. And then they pretty much just have difficulties with early literacy learning, right? Early literacy learning, and then it looks like, I don't know what teacher is, talking. It looks like a foreign language, but everybody looks like very busy and following teachers and having fun. Not me, but not me. So it's like a social, emotionally very like a awkward feeling, and they feel some isolation from there. And then what do? Children's meant to move, right? They are social animals and meant to move. So instead of participating, following teachers, they move around, or they leave their seats, or they just stay in their seats, but they play with the little items, or just fingers, or daydream. So they do something else. So teachers have those, and that's what we say, just off-task or disruptive behavior and off-task behaviors, right? And then teachers' response would not be nice. And then those behaviors, they are more, distracted, more distanced from main teachers, primary teachers teaching, and then they eventually have, academic difficulties. So their academic performance achievement is very at risk. And then eventually they became school failures, school education deficiencies. So school education deficiencies and school failures start with early literacy, because that's what kindergarten classroom we started teaching. So children, kindergarten and first grade, they finish early literacy. However, they fail there, and then pretty much this cycle chain, dichotomy, continues. So again, cognitive deficit is the beginning. Children, it's not school's fault. However, smarter kindergarten teachers make sure this cognitive deficit part, the cognitive weaknesses. So cognitive 5 years, cognitive weaknesses, cognitive developmental part is not deficiency, not just disability, not delayed, lighter than that. It's still weakness. It's slightly just attention-wise, those. And then it just, consequent poor school performance, of course. And then those poor school performance emotionally, socially, they just kind of, isolated, or just somehow, a little bit off. And then that comes, behavior problems. It's more like off-task behaviors and disruptive behaviors. And then those disruptive behavior means they are not on tasking. So it really just impact their academic learning. So they are behind the delayed academic learning, and then eventually it's a school failures. So that's the chain, chain the lines, but beginning is a cognitive part.